was in my home office, and I heard it before I saw it. That low, scraping sound of someone trying to force open the filing cabinet I kept locked by the window. I stood in the hallway, heart going very still the way it does when something shifts and you understand without anyone telling you that everything is about to change. My son-in-law had been living under my roof for 4 months, and in 4 months, I had learned exactly who he was. Let me go back to March, because that's where it really started, even if I didn't know it then. My daughter Sylvie called me on a Tuesday evening, which was unusual. She normally texted. When she called, I knew something was off. She said she and her husband Marcus had hit a rough patch financially, that the rent on their place in Kitchener had gone up again, that Marcus had been between contracts since January. She asked, her voice careful and light, the voice she used when she was nervous, whether they might come stay with me for a while, just until things stabilized. I live in a three-bedroom house in Guelph. My husband passed 8 years ago. My youngest, my son, is out in Kelowna. It's just me in the garden and the cats. And yes, of course, I said yes. She was my daughter. I didn't even hesitate. They arrived on a Friday with 2 carloads of things and a dog I hadn't been warned about. Sylvie looked thinner than I remembered. She hugged me so long at the door that I held on tighter than I meant to. Marcus shook my hand. Firm grip, direct eye contact, easy smile. He said, "Thank you so much, Evelyn. Really, we won't be any trouble." He called me Evelyn, not Mum, which I appreciated. It felt respectful. I thought he seemed like a decent man who'd fallen on a hard spell. Most people do, at some point or another. The first 2 weeks were fine. Sylvie helped with groceries. Marcus cooked twice. The dog turned out to be well behaved. We ate dinner together most evenings. I told myself it was nice to have noise in the house again. Then small things started. It was nothing dramatic at first. Marcus made a comment about the house. Not a rude comment, more of a musing, while we were sitting on the back porch one evening. He said something like, "This property must be worth quite a bit now, with how the market's been in Guelph." He said it the way people say things they've been thinking about for a while, but are testing out loud for the first time. I said, and changed the subject. A week later, he asked me if I had a financial advisor, sort of casually, in the way you ask someone if they've seen a good movie lately. I said yes. He said his uncle did wealth management and that if I was ever looking to restructure anything, he could connect us. I said I was happy with my current arrangement. He didn't push. He never pushed directly. That was the thing about Marcus. He had a way of planting a seed and then walking away and waiting to see if it grew on its own. I noticed it. I filed it. What I couldn't ignore, what started keeping me up at night, was what was happening to Sylvie. She stopped finishing her sentences around him. Not in a dramatic way, just this small habit of trailing off if he was in the room, looking at him before she'd answer a question I'd asked her. She'd been a confident woman, my daughter. She'd managed a small legal office in Waterloo for 6 years. She was sharp. She had opinions. But around Marcus, she seemed to shrink slightly, like a sweater that's been washed too warm. I didn't say anything at first. I told myself I was projecting. I told myself it was their dynamic and not my place. Then I walked past the guest room one night and heard him, his voice very low and very flat, saying, "You always do this. You make everything about yourself when I'm trying to have a real conversation." And then Sylvie's voice, almost inaudible, "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." I stood in the hallway for a moment. Then I went to make tea and didn't sleep until 2 in the morning. I started paying closer attention after that. He borrowed my car one Saturday, said he needed to run an errand in Cambridge. He was gone for 4 hours. I didn't ask where he'd been and he didn't offer it. But that night he asked me, over dinner, whether the mortgage on the house was paid off. I said yes, it had been paid off since 2019. He nodded slowly, like I'd confirmed something he already suspected. I know how memory works, how it's easy to look back and stitch together a pattern that seems obvious now. But I want to be honest, at that point I was still telling myself there were reasonable explanations. A lot of people are curious about property. A lot of couples bicker. I had no proof of anything. What I had was a feeling in my chest that had started as unease and was becoming something harder. The turning point came in early June. Sylvie and I were in the garden on a weekday. Marcus had gone out, we didn't know where, replanting the tomato seedlings she'd grown from seed on the kitchen windowsill, and she was quieter than usual. I asked if she was all right. She said yes. I kept working. Then, after a long moment, she said, "Mum, has Marcus said anything to you about the house?" I set down my trowel. She told me that Marcus had been talking to her for months about the idea of them eventually inheriting or co-owning the property. He'd been framing it to her as practical, forward-thinking. "Your mum's not going to need the whole place forever, and we could put real roots down, do renovations, build equity." He had been, she said, researching what it would take to be added to the title. She said it with this expression on her face that wasn't quite worry and wasn't quite embarrassment. More like she was relieved to say it out loud and scared of what came next. I asked her what she thought about it. She looked at the tomatoes for a long moment. Then she said, "I think I've been letting him talk me into a lot of things I'm not sure about." We didn't say anything else about it that day, but something settled in me, a quiet, clear resolve. I had spent 8 years managing this house, these finances, this life on my own. I was not going to lose it to someone who had never once asked me how I was doing without following it with a question about my assets. That night, I called my daughter's old friend Petra, who is a family law paralegal in Hamilton. I told her what I'd told Sylvie, and more. She listened without interrupting, which I appreciated. When I was done, she said, "Evelyn, what you're describing is financial coercion within the family context. It's more common than people think. Document everything." She told me to keep a record of every conversation. She told me to check my important documents, the deed to the house, my will, my power of attorney, to make sure nothing had been accessed or altered. She told me gently but directly that if he was researching title transfers, I should speak to my own lawyer before any further discussions happened. She also said something I wrote down afterwards because I wanted to remember it exactly. "You're allowed to protect yourself without feeling like you're being unkind." I didn't sleep well that week, but I started doing things. I called my lawyer, Dennis, who has handled my affairs since before my husband died. I told him everything. He said he'd flag my file and that I should call him immediately if anyone approached me about signing anything. He also suggested I look into whether any documents in my home had been disturbed. I have a filing cabinet in my home office. It's locked, a proper metal lateral cabinet, the kind that takes a key. Inside are my original deed, my will, my RRSP statements, my power of attorney documents, and several years' worth of financial records. The key lives on a small hook inside my bedroom closet, behind a winter coat. Not Fort Knox, I know, but it had never needed to be. I checked the cabinet. The lock looked fine, but on the top of the cabinet there was a small smudge, faint, oily, like someone had pressed their hands there, and one of the folders inside had been shifted slightly, not put back flush the way I keep things. I might have imagined it. I told myself that, but I bought a small digital camera, the kind that sits flush on a shelf and looks like a clock, and I put it on the bookshelf across from the filing cabinet. I tested it. It worked. I didn't tell anyone. Then I started paying attention to when Marcus was alone in the house. He had a habit of sleeping in on the mornings. Sylvie worked her shifts at the restaurant. She had taken a part-time job at a place on Wyndham Street, breakfast and lunch service. On those mornings, I would sometimes leave the house for a walk or to run an errand, and Marcus would be home alone for an hour or two. I had always thought nothing of it. I thought about it now. I checked the camera footage each time I came back. For 10 days, nothing. He'd make coffee, watch something on his phone, take the dog to the backyard. Normal. Then, on a Thursday morning in late June, I left for what I told him would be a dentist appointment. I drove to the end of the street, parked, and waited 20 minutes. Then I drove quietly back, parked 2 houses down, and went in through the back door. I didn't need to look at the camera footage that time. I could hear him before I reached the hallway. That scraping sound, low, deliberate. And then the unmistakable metallic complaint of someone working at a lock with something they shouldn't be using. I stood in the kitchen doorway and looked down the hall toward my office. The door was open. I could see him in profile, crouched down, using what looked like a letter opener or thin tool on the filing cabinet lock. He hadn't heard me come in. My hands were very steady, which surprised me afterwards. I took out my phone. I opened the camera. I recorded 14 seconds of him, clearly visible, clearly working at that lock. 14 seconds doesn't sound like much, but it is when the image is that clear. Then I stepped back into the kitchen and called Marcus's name, loud and ordinary, like I'd just come in from a normal morning. I heard him startle, heard the scramble of him standing up, heard the rapid footsteps. He appeared in the kitchen doorway 30 seconds later, face neutral, coffee cup in hand. He'd grabbed it off the counter on his way past. He said, "Oh hey, you're back early." I said yes. Appointment got rescheduled. He nodded and went to the backyard to throw the ball for the dog. I sat down at the kitchen table and my legs were shaking slightly, the way they hadn't been when I was standing there recording him. I think the body knows what it's doing in the moment and lets you feel it after. I called Dennis that afternoon. I sent him the video. He said, "All right, we're going to do this properly." We made a plan over the following week. Dennis contacted the Guelph Police Service's non-emergency line and explained the situation. Ongoing attempt to access private documents, evidence of attempted coercion, video documentation. They assigned an officer to the file. Dennis also got a locksmith to come while Marcus and Sylvie were both out, and we changed the filing cabinet lock and added a second deadbolt to the office door. I moved the most critical documents, the deed, the will, the POA, to the safety deposit box at my branch on Stone Road. I had one more conversation with Sylvie. It was hard. I laid out everything I had, the video, the records of conversations I'd been keeping, what Petra had told me, what Dennis had confirmed. She sat at the kitchen table and didn't speak for a long time. Then she said, "I keep thinking I missed something. Something I should have seen earlier." I said, "So did I, but we see it now." She cried. I let her. I made tea and sat with her until she was done. She told me she wanted to leave, that she had been wanting to leave for a while, but hadn't known how to say it without making it real. I told her she could stay here as long as she needed, and that we would handle Marcus together, correctly, with witnesses. On a Tuesday morning, Dennis and the officer, Constable Reyes, came to the house while Marcus was home. Sylvie was there too. I had wanted her there, not because she owed him a confrontation, but because I thought she deserved to see it. We knocked on the guest room door. Marcus opened it in a t-shirt, clearly expecting a normal morning. And then he saw Dennis and Constable Reyes standing in the hallway behind me, and his expression went through several things very quickly before it settled into something carefully blank. I said, "We need to talk. Please come to the kitchen." We sat down. Dennis did most of the talking, calm and factual. He laid out what we had, the video footage, the documented conversations, the evidence that my personal financial records had been accessed without permission, the concerns around financial elder abuse as defined under the Ontario Seniors Care Act and the Criminal Code. He said that no charges had been laid at this time, but that the file was open and that any further action would result in a formal complaint. Marcus started with denial, brief, automatic, reflexive. Then he tried a different approach, something softer, something about misunderstanding and how he'd just been curious, just looking out for everyone's future. Constable Reyes wrote notes and didn't look up. He was out of the house by Friday. He left quietly. No scene. I think people like Marcus, people who rely on working in the dark, on the slow erosion of someone's confidence, don't actually know what to do when a light gets turned on. Sylvie stayed. She slept for about 3 days. Long, deep sleeps, like a person recovering from something. She called her old employer in Waterloo. She had lunch with Petra, who she hadn't seen in almost a year. Slowly, she started finishing her sentences again, started having opinions about dinner, about what she wanted to do on weekends, about what she thought. I don't tell this story to make myself sound clever. I had help from Petra, from Dennis, from Constable Reyes, from a camera that cost $47. I got lucky that the patterns were legible enough that I could document them. Not everyone does. What I'll say is that the voice that told me something was wrong, that quiet, insistent feeling that something was being taken from my daughter and from me, that voice was right. It had been right from the first evening on the porch, when Marcus looked at my property and thought out loud. I trusted it. Eventually, I wish I had trusted it sooner. But we got there. Sylvie is still here, for now. She's looking at apartments. She's thinking about going back to school part-time, something she dropped when she met Marcus. Last week she planted a second row of tomatoes. She didn't ask anyone's permission. She just did it, and then she called me out to look at them, and we stood in the garden in the late afternoon sun, and I thought, this is what I was protecting. Not the deed, not the cabinet, not the documents. This. I still think about that Thursday morning sometimes. The way my hands were steady when they should have been shaking. The way I stood in the kitchen doorway and just recorded it. 14 seconds. I've thought about what made that possible, and I keep coming back to the same answer. It wasn't luck, and it wasn't toughness in the way people mean when they use that word. It was the slow accumulation of paying attention, of refusing to talk myself out of what I already knew. Marcus didn't fail because I outsmarted him. He failed because he underestimated what happens when a person decides to act with integrity. Not loudly, not dramatically, but consistently, in small choices made over weeks. Calling Dennis, talking to Petra, buying a $47 camera and checking it every morning. None of those things felt heroic at the time. They felt like quiet, sensible steps. But they added up. Actions have weight. The things we do, and the things we choose not to ignore, carry forward. There's something I've learned about the kind of person Marcus was, the kind of slow, patient erosion he practiced. It only works in the dark. It depends on the other person doubting themselves, second-guessing their own perception, staying polite when politeness has stopped being warranted. The moment I stopped performing uncertainty, I didn't actually feel. The moment I said to myself, no, I know what I'm seeing, the whole thing started to unravel. Clarity is its own kind of protection. And I think about Sylvie. I think about what it takes to leave something that has slowly become your whole world, even when that world has started to diminish you. She didn't leave because I forced her hand. She left because, for the first time in a long time, she had a safe place to think clearly. That's all it was. A kitchen table, a cup of tea, a mother who wasn't going to tell her she was overreacting. Sometimes the most useful thing you can offer someone is just a steady presence, and the truth, said gently, without flinching. She's planting tomatoes now. She has opinions about dinner again. She laughs at things without checking first to see if it's allowed. Those aren't small things. I spent a long time thinking I needed to protect the deed to this house, the documents in that filing cabinet, and yes, those mattered. And I'm glad I protected them. But what I was really protecting was her. The version of her that existed before Marcus. The version that's slowly coming back. I don't think any of us moves through something like this without it changing us. I'm more careful now, more willing to say uncomfortable things out loud before they fester, less patient with my own politeness when my instincts are telling me something different. That's not bitterness. It's just knowledge, earned the hard way, used going forward. If I had one thing to say to anyone watching this who is sitting with that same quiet unease I had last March, it's this. The feeling you keep pushing down is probably right. You don't have to be certain before you act. You just have to be honest with yourself, take one small step, and trust that the next step will become clear. It usually does.